What would you do if the voice behind the door sounded exactly like yours? What would you do if the patient file you were carrying had your name on it? I didn't plan to work the night shift forever. It was supposed to be temporary. Something to get me through a rough year after my divorce, while I figured out what came next. That's what I told myself when I took the job. I was 38, living alone again for the first time in over a decade, renting a small apartment just outside a mid-sized town in the Midwest. Nothing remarkable about the place. Strip malls, long roads, quiet neighborhoods that shut down after 9 p.m. The kind of town where people assume nothing bad really happens. The job was overnight security at a private medical record storage facility. Not a hospital, not a clinic, just a large, windowless building on the edge of an industrial park where old patient files were archived. Rows and rows of boxed records, climate-controlled rooms, locked sections. Boring by design. That's what the supervisor told me during orientation. Quiet job, he said. Mostly paperwork. Just keep logs, walk the floors every hour, make sure nothing's out of place. I like the quiet. After months of sleeping on a couch and listening to lawyers argue over my life, silence felt like relief. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I worked alone. No cameras monitored me directly, only the building itself. Motion sensors, door alarms, access logs. Everything fed into a small security office near the main entrance. That room became my world for 8 hours every night. The first few weeks were exactly what I expected. Uneventful. The building settled at night with soft ticking noises from cooling systems and distant hums from the HVAC. I made my rounds, checked locks, logged times. Some nights I listened to the radio low. Other nights I read. Then, about a month in, something changed. It started with the logs. Part of my job was reviewing automated access records at the end of each shift. They showed when secured sections were opened, by whom, and at what time. Keycards were required for every door beyond the main floor. One morning around 6:40 a.m., I noticed an entry that didn't make sense. At 3:17 a.m., one of the archive rooms on the third floor showed a door open and close sequence. The ID field was blank. At first, I assumed it was a glitch. Systems mess up. I noted it in my report and moved on. The next night it happened again. Different room. Same thing. Door opened at 2:54 a.m. No ID attached. I checked the physical lock during my rounds. Everything was secure. No signs of forced entry. The seals on the file boxes inside were intact. Nothing missing. I mentioned it to my supervisor when he came in that morning. He frowned, tapped the screen, and shrugged. Probably sensor lag, he said. If it keeps happening, IT will look at it. It did keep happening. Not every night. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Always between 2 and 4 a.m. Always a different archive room. Always no ID. I started paying closer attention during my rounds. I slowed down. Listened more carefully. That's when I noticed the sound. It was faint. Almost nothing. A soft dragging noise that came and went. At first, I thought it was ventilation. Or maybe my shoes echoing strangely. The building was large and sound traveled oddly at night. But the dragging had rhythm. Slow. Uneven. It always stopped when I stopped walking. I told myself I was imagining it. Night work messes with your head. You start hearing things because there's nothing else to hear. Still, I began carrying my flashlight in my hand instead of clipped to my belt. Around week 7, I found something that finally unsettled me. I was doing my 3 a.m. round on the 3rd floor. As I passed one of the archive rooms, I noticed the door wasn't fully closed. It was off by maybe an inch. I froze. That door was supposed to lock automatically. I had checked it earlier in the night. I pushed it open slowly, expecting to see broken seals or disturbed boxes. Everything looked normal. Rows of shelves. Identical brown boxes. Dust undisturbed. Then I noticed the floor. There were faint scuff marks leading from the center of the room toward the back wall. Not footprints. Just long, shallow streaks like something heavy had been dragged. I followed them to the wall. There was nothing there. No hidden door. No vent large enough for a person. Just concrete. I stood there longer than I should have, listening to my own breathing echo in the space. The silence felt thick, pressurized. I locked the door and logged the incident. That night, I didn't listen to the radio. A few days later, I started finding small changes in the security office. Nothing obvious. A chair slightly out of position. A clipboard moved. A pen not where I left it. I told myself I was tired, that I was forgetting things. Then one night I came back from a round and found the office door open. I knew I had locked it. My stomach dropped. I stepped inside slowly, scanning corners, checking under the desk. Nothing. But on the desk, my logbook was open. I hadn't left it open. One line had been written in the margin of the page. Not in my handwriting. It said, "You miss a lot when you walk." I stared at it for a long time. I didn't call the police. I didn't call my supervisor. I wish I could tell you why. Pride maybe. Or fear of looking foolish. Or some stubborn part of me that needed to understand what was happening. I installed a small voice recorder in the office the next night, just to capture ambient sound while I was on rounds. When I listened to it later, my hands shook. For most of the recording, there was nothing. Just hums and distant clicks. Then at 3:12 a.m. a sound started. Footsteps. Slow. Soft. Moving around the office. Then a chair creaked. Then breathing. Not mine. The breathing stayed close to the microphone for nearly 3 minutes. Slow, controlled, patient. Then it stopped. No door sound. No footsteps leaving. Just silence. I barely slept that day. That night, I decided not to do full rounds. I stayed in the office and watched the monitors. I told myself if someone was inside the building, I'd see them. At 2:48 a.m., one of the archive room sensors tripped. 3rd floor. I watched the hallway camera feed. Nothing moved. Then, on a camera I rarely checked, the one covering the far end of the 3rd floor corridor, I saw something. A shape near the floor. At first I thought it was a shadow. Then it moved, slowly, dragging itself forward, staying just below the camera's main field of view. I leaned closer to the screen. The shape passed under the camera completely. When it emerged on the other side, I realized what I was seeing was a person. But they weren't walking. They were pulling themselves forward with their arms. Their legs didn't move. Their head was tilted back at an unnatural angle, face turned toward the camera, eyes open. Watching. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The feed cut out. All the monitors went black at once. The lights in the office flickered. I heard the dragging sound outside the door. Closer than ever. I locked the door and backed into the corner, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The dragging stopped. Then came the knocking. Not loud. Not aggressive. 3 slow taps. Then a pause. Then 3 more. A voice spoke from the other side. "Come." Familiar. "Don't hide," it said. It was my voice. Perfectly matched. My tone. My cadence. "I only use what you leave behind." The door handle moved slightly, testing. Then everything went quiet. The lights came back on. The monitors flickered to life. The hallway outside the office was empty. I stayed locked in that room until morning. When my supervisor arrived, I quit on the spot. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I walked out and never came back. I tried to forget about it. I tried to move on. 6 months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a medical record. My name was on it. Time-stamped from 2009. The diagnosis listed a spinal injury from a car accident I was in years ago. Under mobility prognosis, someone had handwritten a note. Subject learned to move differently. At the bottom of the page, in the margin, the same handwriting as the logbook. You walked away. I didn't. I don't work nights anymore. And sometimes when I'm alone and the house is quiet, I hear something moving just outside my bedroom door. Slow. Dragging. Patient. Waiting for me to stop walking. I worked nights in a hospital for almost 6 years, and for most of that time, nothing happened that would make a good story. That's the truth people don't like to hear. Hospitals at night are quiet, procedural, and repetitive. You learn routines. You learn sounds. You learn which noises matter and which ones don't. This happened during my last year on the job. I was a patient transport technician at a regional hospital in Pennsylvania. Not a nurse, not security. My job was simple. Move patients between departments during overnight hours. Or to imaging. Imaging to ICU. ICU to surgery prep. Dead hours work. You push beds, wheelchairs, gurneys. You don't ask questions unless you're required to. The night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Staffing was minimal. Whole wings were effectively dark. running on emergency lighting only. Certain floors shut down completely after midnight unless something urgent came in. You get used to the emptiness. There was one rule everyone knew but nobody wrote down. If you got a transport request after 3 a.m. that didn't come through the system, you didn't take it. I didn't learn that rule until I broke it. It was a Wednesday night in early January. Snow outside. Quiet air. I was halfway through my shift, sitting at the transport desk scrolling through my phone when the desk phone rang. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the line it came in on. The internal transport line hadn't been used in years. Most requests came digitally. I hesitated before picking up. A woman spoke immediately. I need a transport from the surgical holding area to sub-basement 2. Her voice was calm, professional. No emotion. She sounded like she belonged there. I asked for a patient ID. There was a pause. Patient file is attached to the chart, she said. Just come now. The line went dead. I should have flagged it. I should have checked the system. But nights are about momentum. You don't stop unless something feels obviously wrong. I grabbed a wheelchair and headed towards surgical holding. That area was technically closed overnight. Only used if there was an emergency surgery queued. The lights were on but dimmed. No staff. No patient at the desk. Then I saw the chart on the counter. Manila folder. No barcode sticker. Handwritten label with a last name only. No first name. No DOB. No wristband attached. That should have stopped me. Instead, it irritated me. Sloppy paperwork happened more often than administration liked to admit. I found the patient sitting in a wheelchair near the wall. Male. Late 50s maybe. Hospital gown. Bare feet resting on the foot supports. He was upright, alert, eyes open. Too alert. Most patients at that hour were medicated, confused, or asleep. This man watched me approach like he'd been waiting. Transport? I asked. He nodded once. Didn't speak. I checked his chart. Mostly blank pages. No vitals. No notes. Just a handwritten line under destination. SB2. Sub-basement 2. That floor wasn't on public maps. Storage, old records, decommissioned equipment. Maintenance accessed it occasionally. Patients didn't go there. I told him we needed to confirm his destination. He looked at me and said very clearly, they already did. His voice was dry, throaty, like he hadn't spoken in a while. I pushed the wheelchair into the hallway. The route to the service elevators took us through a connecting corridor that was rarely used at night. Motion sensors clicked lights on in sections as we passed, then shut them off behind us. I felt like we were being erased as we moved. He didn't shift in the chair, didn't look around, just stared straight ahead. Halfway there, I noticed something off about the way the wheelchair moved. It felt heavier than it should have. Not just weight, resistance, like the wheels were dragging slightly even though they weren't locked. I checked them while we stopped at an intersection. They spun freely. I kept going. At the elevator bank, the call button for the service lift was already lit. Someone had called it. The doors opened almost immediately. Inside, the elevator smelled old, dusty, like in used space. The panel had buttons for floors that no longer existed. Labels scratched out. Tape residue. There was a small metal key slot below the panel marked Authorized Access. I hadn't noticed it before. The patient reached out and pressed SB2. I hadn't seen him move his hands until then. The elevator descended slowly. No music. No chime. As we passed below ground level, the lights flickered once. Then twice. Then stabilized. The doors opened into a long concrete hallway with low ceilings and exposed pipes. Emergency lights cast everything in a dull yellow glow. This was not a patient area. I stopped the wheelchair just outside the elevator. I need to call this in, I said. The man turned his head toward me. Up close, I saw his eyes clearly for the first time. They were bloodshot but focused, intent. He wasn't sick in the way hospital patients usually are. He was waiting. For what? He asked. For confirmation, I said. He smiled. It wasn't wide. It wasn't threatening. It was tired. They don't confirm down here, he said. They record. I didn't respond. I reached for my radio. It crackled, then went silent. No static. No reply. The hallway stretched ahead, ending in a heavy metal door with faded lettering. Archive ward, closed. There were marks on the floor. Scuff patterns. Repeated paths. Wool tracks. Lots of them. Some overlapped. Some ended abruptly. "You can leave," the man said. "They'll find someone else." That's when I noticed his feet. They weren't resting on the supports anymore. They were dragging lightly against the floor. The skin on the tops was worn raw, like he'd been moved this way before. "Who are you?" I asked. He looked forward again. "I was admitted," he said. "A long time ago." The lights behind us shut off. The elevator doors closed. I backed away slowly. "I'm going back," I said. "I'm not authorized." "You already brought me," he said. "That's the part that matters." The metal door at the end of the hall opened on its own. Inside was a ward. Beds lined up in rows. Old hospital beds. Some missing rails. Some stained. Charts hung at the foot of each one. Most beds were empty. Some weren't. Figures lay motionless under thin sheets. Faces partially visible. Too still. Not sleeping. Stort. The man stood up from the wheelchair. He did it slowly, carefully, like it hurt. When he put weight on his legs, I saw braces beneath the gown. Metal supports bolted in place. "They stopped rounding," he said. "Stopped discharging. Stopped explaining." He took a step toward the ward. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main floor. I didn't look back. I didn't log the transport. I told my supervisor the elevator malfunctioned, that I got disoriented. He looked at me for a long time before nodding. 2 weeks later, a memo went out. Sub-basement access permanently restricted. All archived patient materials to be relocated. I thought it was over. Then, months later, after I quit, I requested my employment records. Included was a transport log from that night. Time stamped. Completed. Destination, SB2. Patient name listed. Was mine. Admit date, 2007. Diagnosis, long-term inpatient, non-responsive. Disposition status, transfer pending. At the bottom of the page, handwritten. Subject remains cooperative when he doesn't remember. I don't work in hospitals anymore. Sometimes late at night, my legs ache for no reason, and I dream of elevators that keep going down. I took the job because it was supposed to be quiet. That's what the posting said. Overnight emergency communications assistant. Not dispatcher, technically. My role was to support the night shift, log calls, monitor inactive lines, flag anomalies for supervisors, and handle overflow when things got busy. I wasn't the one sending police or ambulances. I was the one sitting behind the people who did, watching screens and typing notes that most callers never knew existed. The call center was in a low concrete building outside a small city in Ohio. No windows, thick walls, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly even when everything else was silent. At night, there were usually 6 of us total. 2 full dispatchers, 1 supervisor, and 3 support staff. The hours were brutal, midnight to 8 a.m., but the pace was slow. Most calls came earlier in the evening. By 2 or 3 a.m., it was usually drunks, wrong numbers, or people who just needed to hear another human voice. I liked the structure. The calm repetition. Headset on, screens glowing, coffee cooling beside my keyboard. The system we used was old but reliable. Every call came in with a timestamp, location ping, and routing code. Even hang-ups left a trace. That was important. Nothing disappeared. Everything was recorded, archived, searchable. That's why what happened still doesn't make sense. It started with a call that wasn't assigned to anyone. At 3:21 a.m. one Tuesday, I noticed a line light up on the monitoring panel. No dispatcher indicator. No routing code. Just an active timer counting up. That wasn't supposed to happen. I leaned forward, assuming it was a glitch, and checked the call details. Caller ID, unavailable. Location, null. Routing, unassigned. The timer hit 30 seconds. I flagged the supervisor, Mark, and pointed at the screen. He frowned, tapped a few keys, and shook his head. System hiccup, he said. Log it and drop it. I did. The next night it happened again. Same time window. Between 3:15 and 3:30 a.m. same unassigned line. Same blank fields. This time, the timer ran for over 2 minutes before dropping on its own. No audio registered. No waveform. Just a silent connection. By the end of the week, I had logged 4 of them. Mark sent a ticket to IT. They replied with a boilerplate response about legacy routing conflicts. Nothing urgent. I would have forgotten about it if not for what happened the following Monday. The call came in at 3:19 a.m. Unassigned. Blank. But this time there was audio. At first it was just static. Low, uneven. Like someone breathing too close to a microphone without speaking. I adjusted my headset volume. Then I heard a voice. It was faint. Mel, come. I think I made a mistake, he said. The audio cut. The call dropped immediately after. I sat there staring at the screen. I replayed the clip. Same thing. Static. Breathing. That single sentence. No background noise. No location data. I flagged it again. Mark listened, arms crossed, jaw tight. Could be a misroute, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. Why wouldn't it show a dispatcher? I asked. He didn't answer. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls continued. Not every night. Never predictable. Always between 3 and 4 a.m. Sometimes there was breathing. Sometimes muffled movement like fabric brushing against a phone. Once faint tapping, rhythmic and slow. Only twice did the caller speak. The second time he said, "They told me not to hang up." That was it. Each call ended before we could route it. Before we could respond. IT couldn't trace the origin. The phone number didn't exist in the system logs. Not even as a corrupted entry. But the recordings were there. That was the part that bothered me most. The system wasn't inventing anything. Something was calling in. One night, after a particularly quiet stretch, I stayed late and pulled archived data. I searched for similar unassigned calls going back as far as the system allowed. There were dozens. Hundreds. The oldest entry dated back over 10 years. Same pattern. Same time window. Same blank fields. Some had audio clips attached. I listened to them one by one. Different voices. Different ages. Men and women. All calm. All confused. I don't know where I am. They said someone would answer. I can hear you breathing. I think I'm still on the line. Some recordings ended with crying. Others with silence that stretched for minutes. None of them were ever routed. None were resolved. The notes field was always the same. Dropped, system error. I brought this to Mark the next night. He went quiet as I scrolled through the list. You weren't supposed to dig into that, he said finally. What is this? I asked. He looked tired. Older than he had a moment before. Those calls don't go anywhere, he said. They never have. That doesn't answer. They're not emergencies, he cut in. And they're not traceable. We can't respond to what we can't locate. So we just ignore them? We log them, he said. That's our job. After that conversation, I noticed something else. Whenever one of those calls came in, Mark wasn't at his desk. Every time. He would step out minutes before. Bathroom. Smoke break. Paperwork. Too consistent to be coincidence. One night I followed him. I waited until the unassigned line lit up, 3:27 a.m., then quietly got up and walked down the hall. The building was silent. Most lights dimmed. Mark was in the records room. Not filing. Listening. He had a headset on, connected to an auxiliary terminal I'd never seen used. I stood in the doorway, frozen. On his screen was the call timer. Running. He didn't speak. Just listened. After about a minute, he reached over and pressed a key. The call ended. He turned and saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. You weren't supposed to hear them, he said. Hear who? He sighed and gestured for me to come in. These calls, he said, aren't coming from phones. He pulled up a diagram on the screen. Old schematics. Redacted sections. Years ago, he continued, this center was tied into another system. Experimental. Emergency failover. Internal routing for situations that didn't fit protocols. Like what? Like people who couldn't be located, he said, because they weren't supposed to exist anymore. I didn't understand. He clicked another file open. Incident reports. Missing persons. Declared deceased. Institutionalized. Lost custody cases. Patients who vanished during transfers. Inmates misprocessed. Witnesses relocated and never checked on. They call, he said, when the system lets them. From where? He looked at me. From wherever they ended up. That night when I went home, I couldn't sleep. The next evening before my shift, I checked my voicemail. There was a new message. No caller ID. Static. Breathing. Then my voice. I think I made a mistake. I went to work anyway. At 3:22 a.m., the unassigned line lit up. This time, the location field populated. My apartment address. Before I could react, the call routed itself. Not to a dispatcher. To my terminal. The audio was clear. I was breathing on the other end. Slow. Uneven. I stayed on the line, my voice said. Like they told me. The timer kept running. I tried to disconnect. The system wouldn't respond. On the notes field, text appeared on its own. Caller confirmed. Then, subject ready for archiving. Mark stood behind me. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It doesn't happen to everyone. Just the ones who listen too long. The call didn't end. I don't know how much time passed after that. I remember the lights buzzing. I remember my headset getting heavy. The last thing I heard was breathing that wasn't synced with mine anymore. If you're listening to this now, it means the recording stayed in the system. That means I did too. And somewhere between 3 and 4 a.m., my line is still open, waiting for someone else to answer.